Jake Morrison stood outside the biggest doors he had ever seen in his life. The doors were made of some kind of crystal that seemed to glow from the inside. They were so tall that he had to lean his head back just to see the top. Other beings walked past him, going into the chamber beyond. Some looked like giant insects, others were made of what appeared to be living rock, and a few seemed to be made of pure light. Jake wore a simple black suit, the kind that diplomats from Earth always wore to important meetings. Next to all these strange aliens with their fancy robes and glowing body parts, he looked very plain. That was exactly what he wanted. Earth had taught him that sometimes it was better to look simple while being very smart underneath. Captain Lisa Harper stood next to him. She wore her military uniform with all the proper decorations. Her face showed no emotion, even though Jake knew she was probably as nervous as he was. Behind them stood 3 other humans from Earth. They were here because the Galactic Council had demanded they come and explain themselves. The big crystal doors opened without making any sound. Jake and his team walked into the chamber, and Jake had to stop himself from staring. The room was so big that he could not see the far walls. The ceiling seemed to go up forever, filled with lights that looked like real stars. Floating platforms hung in the air, each one holding a different kind of alien creature. There were 12 different species represented in the chamber. Jake had studied each one before coming here. The Vorthans looked like giant praying mantises, but with 4 arms instead of 2. The Etherians were beings made of energy that lived inside clear containers shaped like bottles. The Crystalline Collective were creatures made of living crystal that could change their shape and color based on their emotions. At the center of it all sat High Counselor Zekthar of the Vorthan Empire. His 4 arms moved in the air as he gestured for silence. When he spoke, his voice came through the translation devices that all the species used to understand each other. Humans, Zekthar said, and his voice filled the entire huge chamber. You have been called here to explain your actions. 3 weeks ago, your ship called the ESV Defiance encountered pirates near the Outer Rim colonies. Instead of trying to talk to these pirates, you destroyed their ships. This violence troubles the Council. Jake stepped forward. He had practiced this moment many times. Earth had sent him here with very specific instructions about what to say and how to act. The key was to let the aliens talk first, to let them show exactly who they really were before he responded. Honored counselors, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. We are here to answer any questions you have about our methods. We understand that some of our actions might seem harsh to species that have enjoyed peace for so long. A sound like laughter echoed through the chamber, but it was not friendly laughter. It was the kind of laugh that people make when they think they are better than someone else. The laugh came from many different platforms at once. Jake noticed that almost every species in the chamber was making some version of the same mocking sound. The Etherian representative pulsed with bright colors. In their species, this was how they showed amusement, but Jake could tell it was not kind amusement. The being's voice sounded like music, but music with sharp edges. The humans called destroying 3 ships without talking to them first as being harsh. How interesting. Most civilized beings would call such action barbaric. Captain Harper's jaw tightened, but she did not speak. She had been in many battles and knew how to control her emotions. Jake was glad she was here. Her presence reminded everyone that Earth's military was not just about violence, but about discipline and control. Another platform floated closer to the center. On it sat a creature that looked like a living mountain made of blue crystal. This was Shard Song of Depths from the Crystalline Collective. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but the words were not gentle. In the 700 years since this council was formed, the crystal being said, No species has needed to use such primitive methods to solve problems. Even the warlike Greyktal learned to use peaceful solutions within 50 years of joining our council. Perhaps humans simply need more time to evolve beyond their violent nature. More laughter echoed through the chamber. Jake kept his face calm, but inside he was taking note of every word, every gesture, every show of contempt. This was going exactly as Earth had predicted it would. Dr. Susan Clay, Earth's expert on alien species, stood quietly beside Jake. She was watching the alien's body language and taking mental notes. Every species had their own way of showing emotions, and she could see that they were all unified in their feeling of awe, superiority over the humans. A new voice joined the conversation. This one came from Counselor Viltar of the Peaceful Union. Her species looked somewhat like humans, but with skin that changed colors based on their emotions. Right now, her skin was showing patterns of what Jake had learned meant false sympathy. Perhaps, Viltar said in a voice that sounded sweet but felt poisonous, Earth simply needs more guidance. We have programs designed to help less developed species learn better ways to handle conflict. Violence is such a primitive response to problems that could be solved through proper communication. Jake felt Captain Harper shift slightly beside him. He knew she was probably thinking about all the times Earth's military had saved these same species from threats they could not handle themselves. But Jake's instructions were clear. Let them talk. Let them show their true nature first. The chamber filled with more sounds of agreement from the various alien species. Each one seemed eager to take their turn explaining how much more evolved and peaceful they were compared to the primitive humans. Some spoke about their advanced technology. Others talked about their superior philosophy. All of them made it clear that they thought humans were violent children who needed to be taught better ways. High Counselor Zekthar raised his forearms again, calling for quiet. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, showing images of the 3 destroyed pirate ships. The images rotated slowly, showing the damage that human weapons had caused. 3 ships, Zekthar said, his voice heavy with disapproval. Each ship contained dozens of living beings, lives that could have been saved if you had tried to communicate with them first. This is not how civilized species behave. This is not the way of beings who have evolved beyond their base violent instincts. Jake nodded as if he was listening to wisdom, but inside he was smiling. Everything was going according to plan. Earth had known exactly how this meeting would go. The aliens would spend hours lecturing humans about violence and primitive behavior. They would display their sense of moral superiority. They would make it very clear that they thought they were better than humans in every way. And then, when they were finished, Jake would remind them of some very important facts that they seemed to have forgotten. Facts about who they called when their peaceful methods failed. Facts about who they asked to handle the problems that there evolved. Civilized nature could not solve. Jake Morrison stood quietly and let the aliens continue their speeches about human primitiveness. He had all the time in the world. After all, Earth had sent him here not to apologize, but to teach the Galactic Council a lesson they would never forget. High Counselor Zikthar's mandibles clicked together in a way that Jake had learned meant the Vorthan was feeling superior. The sound was like someone snapping their fingers, but much louder and more annoying. Zekthar's forearms moved in gestures that showed his contempt for the humans standing before him. You call destroying 3 ships without even trying to talk to them first as being direct? Zekthar said, his voice filled with scorn. We have a different word for such behavior. We call it barbaric. We call it the action of beings who have not yet learned to think before they act. The other aliens in the chamber made various sounds of agreement. Some clicked, others hummed, and a few made noises that sounded like wind blowing through empty caves. All of these sounds meant the same thing in their different languages. They were all laughing at the humans, but not in a friendly way. "Commander." Roy Banks stood behind Jake, wearing his military uniform with pride. His hands were clasped behind his back in the proper military position, but Jake could see the muscles in his jaw working. Roy had been in many battles and had seen many friends die protecting the very aliens who are now mocking them. It took all of his training to stay quiet and let Jake handle the diplomacy. The platform holding Shard Song of Depths floated closer to the center of the chamber. The crystal being's body changed from blue to a dark purple color, which Jake knew meant deep disapproval in their species. When the creature spoke, its voice made sounds like beautiful music, but the words were ugly. 700 years, the crystal being said slowly, as if speaking to a child who could not understand. For 700 years, this council has existed in peace. No member species has needed to resort to such primitive methods to solve their problems. Even the most warlike races among us learned to embrace peaceful solutions within decades of joining our great alliance. More sounds of agreement echoed through the vast chamber. Jake noticed that every single species was nodding or making their version of agreeing gestures. They were all united in their belief that humans were too violent and stupid to belong. In civilized society, a new platform drifted forward. On it sat a creature that looked like a giant jellyfish made of silver light. This was Speaker Nimdal from the Aquatic Federation. When it spoke, its voice sounded like water flowing over. Smooth stones, but the meaning was harsh. "My people evolved in the deepest oceans of our homeworld," Nimdal said. "For millions of years, we learned that survival comes through cooperation, not conflict. We discovered that violence only creates more violence. When we joined the galactic community, we brought this wisdom with us. It saddens us to see a species that still believes destruction is an answer to problems." Dr. Susan Clay, standing quietly beside Jake, was watching every gesture and listening to every word. As Earth's expert on alien behavior, she could see patterns that others might miss. What she saw was troubling. Every species in the chamber was performing for the others, trying to show who could be the most disgusted by human actions. It was like a contest to see who could insult humans in the most creative way. Another voice joined the chorus of criticism. This time it came from Counselor Veltar of the Peaceful Union. Her skin had changed to patterns of gold and silver, which in her species meant she was feeling very pleased with herself. Her voice was sweet like honey, but honey that had been poisoned. "It is understandable," Veltar said in a tone that adults use when talking to naughty children, "that a young species like humanity would still be controlled by their primitive instincts. After all, you have only been part of galactic civilization for a very short time. Perhaps what you need is not punishment, but education." She gestured toward a section of the chamber where holographic displays showed images of peaceful alien worlds. "We have established rehabilitation centers on many worlds. These facilities are designed to help less developed species learn to control their violent urges. We have had great success with other primitive races who have come to us seeking wisdom." The insult was clear, even though it was wrapped in fake kindness. Veltar was suggesting that humans were like wild animals that needed to be trained to behave properly. The other aliens made approving sounds, clearly liking this idea. High Counselor Zeepthar raised his arms again, and the holographic display in the center of the chamber changed. Now it showed not just the destroyed pirate ships, but also images of human military vessels. The pictures were clearly chosen to make human ships look aggressive and threatening compared to the smooth, peaceful designs of council vessels. "Look at these machines of war," Zekthar said, pointing at the human ships with one of his 4 arms. "See how they are designed only for destruction. Compare them to our vessels, built for exploration, trade, and peaceful contact." Even your tools reveal your violent nature. Captain Lisa Harper finally spoke for the first time since entering the chamber. Her voice was calm and professional, but Jake could hear the steel underneath. Our ships are designed to protect the innocent and defend against those who would do harm. Sometimes that requires weapons. A sound like wind chimes being hit by a hammer came from the Crystalline Collective's platform. It was their way of showing shock and disapproval. Shard Song of Depth spoke again, its voice now sounding like discordant music. Protect? Defend? These are concepts from a more primitive time. In civilized space, there is no need for such outdated ideas. Problems are solved through communication, understanding, and compromise. Only barbaric species still believe that force has any place in modern society. More laughter echoed through the chamber, and this time it was louder and more mocking than before. Jake could see that the aliens were enjoying themselves. They were having fun humiliating the humans, taking turns to see who could make the most cutting remarks about human stupidity and violence. Etherian representative pulsed with bright colors that Jake recognized as their version of amusement. Mixed with contempt, its voice sounded like singing, but the words were sharp as knives. Perhaps humans simply lack the mental capacity to understand peaceful solutions. Their brains may not have evolved enough to grasp concepts beyond fight or flight responses. Commander Banks' hands clenched into fists behind his back, but he did not move or speak. His training and discipline held, even as the aliens suggested that humans were too stupid to be truly intelligent beings. Dr. Clay leaned slightly toward Jake and whispered very quietly, "They are all performing for each other. This is not just about us. They are competing to show their superiority." Jake nodded almost invisibly. He had noticed the same thing. Each species was trying to outdo the others in showing how much more evolved and peaceful they were compared to the primitive humans. They were so busy congratulating themselves on their moral superiority that they had forgotten some very important facts. Facts that Jake was going to remind them of very soon. High Counselor Zeekthar spoke again, his voice now carrying the tone of someone delivering a final judgment. The evidence is clear. Humanity's response to the pirate threat was excessive, violent, and completely unnecessary. A civilized species would have found a peaceful solution that did not require the loss of life. Jake Morrison stood quietly through it all, letting the wave of insults and condescension wash over him. His face showed nothing but polite attention, as if he was listening to valuable wisdom instead of systematic humiliation. Inside, he was counting every slight, remembering every species that had taken their turn to mock humanity's methods. Had prepared him well for this moment. The plan was working perfectly. Soon, it would be his turn to speak, and when he did, these proud, peaceful aliens were going to learn some uncomfortable truths about their civilized society. After 2 long hours of listening to one insult after another, High Counselor Zeekthar finally turned his attention back to the human delegation. His forearms moved in a gesture that meant he was ready to hear what the humans had to say for themselves. The chamber fell quiet, with all the alien species waiting to hear how the primitive humans would try to defend their violent actions. "Ambassador Morrison," Zeekthar said, his voice carrying the tone of a judge about to pass sentence, "you have listened to the concerns of this council. Every species represented here has shared their wisdom about the proper way to handle conflicts. Now we want to hear how Earth responds to these charges of excessive violence and barbaric behavior." Jake Morrison stepped forward into the center of the chamber. He moved slowly and calmly, like a man who had all the time in the world. His simple black suit looked even plainer against the backdrop of the glowing alien technology around him, but somehow he did not seem small or insignificant. Instead, he seemed like a person who was completely comfortable with who he was. "Honored counselors," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space without any strain or effort. I have listened very carefully to each and every one of your testimonies today. I want you to know that I have heard every word you have spoken." He paused and looked around the chamber, making eye contact with representatives from each species. When he continued, his voice was still respectful, but there was something new in it, something that made a few of the more sensitive aliens shift uncomfortably on their floating platforms. "Your species have indeed achieved remarkable things," Jake continued. "The Etherians transcended their physical forms and became beings of pure energy. The Crystalline Collective achieved perfect harmony among all their people. The Vorthan Empire expanded across 1,000 star systems without ever firing a single shot in anger. The Aquatic Federation learned to solve all conflicts through peaceful cooperation. These are truly impressive accomplishments." The aliens made sounds of approval, pleased that the human was finally acknowledging their superiority. Several platforms drifted closer, as if their occupants wanted to hear more praise for their advanced civilizations. Jake nodded as if he agreed completely with their self-congratulation. "Yes, your achievements are remarkable. However, I noticed that in all of your speeches today, none of you mentioned the Devourers." The word hit the chamber like a physical blow. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear the hum of the energy systems that kept the massive room functioning. Several aliens made sounds of distress, and more than one platform jerked backward as if their occupants had been startled. The name that Jake had spoken was one that no species in the council liked to remember. It brought back memories of fear, of helplessness, of a time when all their peaceful wisdom had proven completely useless against a threat that could not be reasoned with. High Counselor Zekthar's mandibles clicked rapidly, which Jake knew was a sign of nervousness in the Vorthan species. When Zekthar spoke, his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence and superiority. "The Devourers?" Zekthar repeated, as if saying the name might summon them back. "That threat was eliminated decades ago. What possible relevance could this have to your violent actions against simple pirates?" Jake smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several of the empathically sensitive species recoil on their platforms. It was not a cruel smile, but it was the smile of someone who knew a secret that others had forgotten. "Eliminated? By whom, exactly?" Jake asked, his voice still calm and polite. "Because according to our records, when the Devourer fleets appeared at the edge of Council space 15 years ago, every single one of your peaceful, evolved species did exactly the same thing." Captain Lisa Harper stepped forward and activated a device on her wrist. Suddenly, the air above the center of the chamber filled with holographic displays showing official documents, communication logs, and military records. The evidence floated in the air where every alien in the chamber could see it clearly. "You called Earth," Harper said, her military training evident in her crisp, clear voice. "All of you. Every peaceful, civilized species in this chamber sent messages to the violent, primitive humans asking us to handle your problem." The holographic displays showed message after message, all with the same basic content. Desperate pleas for help sent to Earth from every member of the Galactic Council. Requests for military assistance against a threat that none of their peaceful methods could handle. Dr. Susan Clay stepped forward, her voice carrying the precise tone of a scientist presenting research findings. 17 human fleets were deployed to deal with the Devourer threat. 43,000 human soldiers participated in the campaign. 862 human ships were destroyed in the fighting, all to save species who are now lecturing us about violence being primitive and barbaric. The chamber was completely silent now. The weight of these facts was crushing the alien sense of moral superiority, like an avalanche crushing a flower. Many of the floating platforms had drifted backward, as if their occupants wanted to hide from the truth that was being displayed in front of them, Commander. Roy Banks activated his own display device, adding more evidence to the collection floating. In the chamber's center, the official council records show that not a single non-human ship fired a shot during the entire Devourer War. Not one. Every act of violence, every destroyed enemy vessel, every dead Devourer was the result of human action. Jake walked closer to High Counselor Zekthar's platform, his voice never rising, but somehow filling the entire vast chamber. The Aquatic Federation spoke beautifully today about evolving beyond conflict and learning that violence only creates more violence. But when the Devourers threatened to drain your ocean worlds dry, who did you call for help? When your philosophy of cooperation failed to stop them from poisoning your spawning grounds, whose violent nature did you suddenly need? The Aquatic Federation's representative, Speaker Nidal, pulsed with colors that Jake recognized as deep shame and embarrassment. The silver jellyfish liked being tried to speak, but no words came out. Jake turned to address the Crystalline Collective's platform. Shard Song of Depths, your people spoke about achieving perfect harmony and learning to solve problems through understanding rather than force. But when the Devourers began consuming your crystal children and using them to build weapons, what did you do? You asked the barbaric humans to stop them with methods too violent for your civilized minds to contemplate. The crystal being's color had changed from purple to a sickly green, which in their species indicated extreme distress and guilt. The peaceful union, Jake continued, turning toward Counselor Veltar's platform, offered to help Earth learn better ways to handle conflict through your rehabilitation programs. But 15 years ago, when the Devourers were converting your people into mindless drones, you did not send us to rehabilitation centers. You sent us a message that said simply, "Please hurry." 3 words. That was your diplomatic solution. Veltar's skin had lost all its golden patterns and was now showing the gray colors of shame. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. Jake looked around the chamber one more time, meeting the gaze of every alien representative who was brave enough to look at him. Every species in this chamber has spent today explaining how much more evolved and peaceful you are compared to primitive humanity. But when threats arise that your peaceful methods cannot handle, you all do the same thing. You call the monsters. You call us. Jake Morrison walked closer to the center of the chamber, moving with the confidence of someone who held all the winning cards in a game. His voice remained calm and respectful, but every word carried the weight of absolute truth. The aliens, who had been so eager to mock humanity just hours before now, sat in stunned silence on their floating platforms. Let me share some more details about how your peaceful methods worked against the Devourers, Jake said, gesturing toward the holographic displays that still floated in the air around him. The Aquatic Federation tried to negotiate with them. For 6 months, you sent your best diplomats, your most skilled communicators, your wisest philosophers. A Devourer's response was to capture your diplomats and use their bodies as raw material to build more ships. Speaker Nim Dal, the jellyfish-like representative of the Aquatic Federation, pulsed with colors that Jake knew meant deep pain and shame. The creature tried to sink lower on its platform, as if hoping to become invisible. Jake turned toward another section of the chamber. The Crystalline Collective attempted to share your consciousness with the Devourers, believing that if they could understand your perfect harmony, they would choose peace. The result was that the Devourers learned how to corrupt your crystal structures and turn your own children into weapons against you. Shard Song of Depths resonated with sounds like breaking glass, which was how their species expressed grief and regret. The crystal being's color had shifted to a deep black that indicated overwhelming shame. Commander Roy Banks stepped forward and activated additional displays. The Peaceful Union sent cultural ambassadors to teach the Devourers about art, music, and beauty. The Devourers used your cultural gifts as bait to lure more of your people into traps. They learned to mimic your songs to draw victims to them. Counselor Veltar's skin had turned completely gray, and she was making small whimpering sounds that her species made when confronted with unbearable truth. The Vorthan Empire, Jake continued, looking directly at High Counselor Zikthar, tried to use your advanced technology to create barriers and shields to keep the Devourers away. You built massive defensive stations around your worlds. The Devourers simply consumed the stations and used the materials to build larger fleets. Your own defenses became weapons pointed at your hearts. Zekthar's 4 arms had stopped moving entirely, hanging limp at his sides. His mandibles were clenched shut, and his large compound eyes were fixed on the floor of his platform rather than looking at Jake. Dr. Susan Clay moved to stand beside Jake. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had studied every detail of the events she was describing. The records show that the Council tried peaceful solutions for 18 months. 18 months of diplomacy, cultural exchange, technological cooperation, and philosophical discussion. During that time, the Devourers consumed 47 worlds and enslaved populations of 23 others. She activated her own display device, showing images that made several aliens turn away in distress. These are the worlds that your peaceful methods failed to save. These are the people who died while you were trying to find non-violent solutions to a problem that could only be solved through violence. The images showed devastated planets, empty cities, and the twisted remains of what had once been thriving civilizations. The destruction was complete and horrifying, a testament to what happened when peaceful species encountered an enemy that could not be reasoned with. Captain Lisa Harper's voice cut through the silence that had fallen over the chamber. After 18 months of failure, the Council finally admitted that peaceful methods were not working. That is when you called Earth, but you did not just ask for help, you begged for it. New holographic displays appeared, showing communication. Transcripts from the desperate final days before Earth intervened. The messages were filled with pleas, promises, and offers of anything Earth might want in exchange for military assistance. The Etherian Collective offered to share their technology for transcending physical form. Harper read from one transcript. The Crystalline Collective promised to give Earth access to their most sacred crystal gardens. The Aquatic Federation offered to terraform ocean worlds specifically for human colonization. The Peaceful Union offered to make Earth the permanent military protector of their space. Jake nodded as each offer was read aloud. You were so desperate to find someone else to do your violence for you that you offered us treasures beyond imagination. But there was one thing you all insisted on in every message. You all made it very clear that you wanted the Devourers completely destroyed, not captured, not relocated, not converted to peaceful ways. Exterminated. The word hung in the air like a curse. Many of the aliens made sounds of distress because Jake had spoken aloud the truth they had all tried to forget. When their peaceful methods failed, they had asked for genocide. Commander Banks pulled up another set of records. The official Council directive to Earth's military command was very specific. Quote, "The Devourer species must be eliminated completely. No negotiations, no prisoners, no mercy. Use whatever methods are necessary to ensure that this threat never rises again." End quote. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Every alien representative was forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that they had not only requested violence, but had specifically asked for the complete destruction of an entire species. "The Vorthan Empire," Jake said, his voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel. "Your 1,000 worlds of peace built through diplomacy and understanding. When the Devourers reached your outer colonies, you did not send cultural ambassadors or peace negotiators. You sent Earth a single message that contained just 3 words. Please hurry up." High Counselor Zeekthar's mandibles clicked weakly, but he could not form words. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and completely destructive to everything he had said earlier about human primitiveness. Dr. Clay addressed the chamber as a whole. The Devourer war lasted 14 months from the time Earth entered the conflict until the last Devourer ship was destroyed. In that time, human forces eliminated every trace of the Devourer species from the galaxy. We did this at your request, using methods that you called barbaric when we used them against pirates. Jake walked slowly around the center of the chamber, looking up at each floating platform in turn. The same species that spent this morning lecturing us about the primitive nature of violence asked us to commit what you would normally call genocide. Complete extermination, no mercy, no survivors. And when we accomplished this task for you, when we saved your civilizations from destruction, what did you do? He paused, letting the question hang in the air for several long moments before answering. It himself. You went back to calling us primitive. You went back to treating human methods as barbaric. You took the peace that our violence bought for you and used it to feel superior to the people who died to give it to you. The truth was settling over the chamber like a heavy blanket of shame. Species that had spent the morning confident in their moral superiority now faced the undeniable reality of their hypocrisy. Jake's voice carried clearly to every corner of the vast space. The Devourers were not the only threat we have handled for you. In the 15 years since Earth joined this council, we have eliminated 47 different dangers to council member species. 47 times you have asked the primitive, humans to solve problems that your advanced civilizations could not handle through peaceful means. The weight of their dependence on human violence was crushing the aliens' pride like a mountain falling on their heads. None of them could look Jake in the eye anymore. High Counselor Zeekthar finally found his voice after several minutes of crushing silence. He raised his forearms in what was supposed to be a gesture of authority, but the movement looked weak and uncertain compared to his earlier confident displays. When he spoke, his voice lacked the commanding tone he had used at the beginning of the session. The situations you describe were exceptional circumstances, Zekthar said, his words coming out slowly as if he was having trouble forming them. Surely you must understand that the general principles of peaceful coexistence cannot be abandoned simply because of occasional unusual threats. Jake Morrison's laugh was soft and quiet, but it carried clearly through the vast chamber. It was not a cruel laugh, but it was the sound of someone who had just heard something incredibly foolish. The laugh seemed to echo off the crystal walls and floating platforms, making it sound much larger than it actually was. Occasional? Jake repeated, raising one eyebrow in a way that made several aliens shift uncomfortably. Counselor, let me tell you about occasional. In the past month alone, we have received distress calls from 6 different council species asking for our help with problems that their peaceful methods cannot solve. Captain Lisa Harper stepped forward and activated her wrist display again. New holographic images appeared in the center of the chamber, showing recent military reports and communication logs. The evidence floated in the air where every alien could see the dates and details clearly. The Etherian Collective contacted us 8 days ago, Harper said, reading from the official reports. They are having problems with energy parasites that are disrupting their meditation centers and feeding on their pure energy forms. These parasites cannot be reasoned with or negotiated with. They simply consume. The Etherians have asked us to destroy them completely. The Etherian representative pulsed with dim, embarrassed colors and tried to make itself smaller within its containment vessel. The Crystalline Collective sent us a request for help 5 days ago, Harper continued. Someone is using illegal mining operations to steal their crystal offspring and sell them as decorative objects to other species. The thieves have ignored all diplomatic protests and legal challenges. The collective has asked us to stop these criminals using whatever force is necessary. Shard Song of Depths made a sound like wind whistling through broken stone, which was how their species expressed shame and regret. Commander Roy Banks activated his own display device, adding more recent evidence to the collection. The Aquatic Federation sent us an emergency message 3 days ago. Unknown parties are dumping toxic waste into their spawning grounds, killing their young before they can develop properly. All attempts at peaceful resolution have failed. They want us to find whoever is responsible and stop them permanently. Speaker Nim Dao had turned completely transparent, which was how his species tried to hide when they were deeply embarrassed. Dr. Susan Clay pulled up additional files from her data storage device. We currently have 7 active missions protecting Council species from threats that their peaceful methods cannot handle. We have 12 more missions scheduled for the next 2 months. Our military forces are so busy protecting peaceful civilizations that we barely have time to defend our own colonies. Jake walked closer to High Counselor Zekthar's platform, his voice remaining calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of controlled anger. You want to know why we destroyed those pirate ships without negotiating first? Let me tell you about the last time we tried your peaceful methods. New holographic displays appeared, showing the aftermath of a pirate attack on a civilian colony. The images were disturbing enough that several aliens looked away rather than see the results of what happened when violence was met with diplomacy. 3 months ago, Captain Harper's ship encountered Krell raiders who had attacked a mining colony, Jake said, gesturing toward the floating images. Following council guidelines about peaceful resolution, Captain Harper spent 6 hours attempting to communicate with the raiders and negotiate the release of their prisoners. Captain Harper's voice was steady and professional, but Jake could hear the pain underneath her words. The raiders used those 6 hours to torture their prisoners to death while broadcasting the executions to their home fleet as is entertainment. They killed 43 civilians, including 12 children under the age of 10, while I was trying to talk to them. The chamber was completely silent, except for the soft sounds of several aliens making their species versions of horrified gasps. The cargo manifests we recovered from the destroyed ships last week showed that the pirates were carrying weapons capable of destroying entire cities. Commander Banks added, they had already used these weapons on 2 civilian colonies before we encountered them. The survivors they had taken were going to be sold as slaves to the highest bidders. Jake looked around the chamber, meeting the gaze of every alien representative who was brave enough to look at him. But please, tell us more about how negotiation would have saved lives. Explain to us how talking to people who torture children for fun would have been more effective than stopping them permanently. Dr. Clay stepped forward with her final piece of evidence. The psychological profiles we have developed of hostile species show a clear pattern. The ones who can be reasoned with respond to our initial diplomatic contact attempts. The ones who cannot be reasoned with view our peaceful approaches as signs of weakness to be exploited. She gestured toward the evidence floating around them. Every single violent encounter we have had in the past year involved enemies who had already demonstrated that they would not respond to diplomatic solutions. We do not choose violence first. We choose violence when it is the only option left that will save innocent lives. Jake Morrison stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the evidence of humanity's burden as the galaxy's unwilling guardians. His voice carried to every corner of the vast space, clear and strong and completely without apology. Earth will continue to serve this council as we always have, he said, looking directly at each alien representative in turn. We will answer your calls when your peaceful species need violent solutions to problems you cannot solve yourselves. We will sacrifice our people to preserve your principles and protect your civilizations. He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering his final statement. But do not ever again mistake our willingness to do what you cannot do for primitiveness. Do not confuse our ability to use violence effectively with a love of violence. And do not treat the people who die protecting you as if they are somehow inferior to the people they die to save. Jake turned toward the massive crystal doors through which they had entered. The next time you need monsters dealt with, remember that you are calling monsters to do it. Remember that your peace exists because others are willing to be violent on your behalf. And maybe, just maybe, show a little gratitude instead of contempt for the people who keep you safe. The human delegation walked out of the chamber in perfect military formation, their heads held high and their steps confident. Behind them, they left a council that would never again mistake human directness for human weakness, or human strength for human primitivness. In the stunned silence that followed their departure, more than one species began to truly understand what they had been taking for granted all these years. The galaxy's peace was kept by human hands willing to do terrible things so that others could remain clean. The galaxy's guardians wore human faces, and the galaxy's elite had just learned the true price of their civilized society.